Here we are, what we talk about today. Well, I was thinking of looking at a famous quote which is credited to Steve Biko, the South African apartheid activist who was murdered in a South African prison by the authorities in 1979 when the Soweto riots erupted. And he said, "Change the way they're thinking and nothing will be the same again." Now, whether I'm confident that Steve Biko wasn't the first person to say that, but that's the whole purpose of political change, radical thought, reform. Change the way people think and things will never be the same again. Look at what's happened as far as gay rights are concerned, marriage equality in this country. There's a huge shift in the way people fought in this country regarding these issues, and things were never the same again. Unfortunately, the same principle cannot be applied to the inequalities which exist in our society. They cannot be applied, and it's for one very good reason. 40 years ago, when Hawke and Keating and Howard launched and promoted the deregulation, privatisation, globalisation, corporatised revolution which has swept over this country and the rest of the world, they changed the way people thought. And people began to think of themselves as individual entrepreneurs. Even people who were wage earners began to see themselves as investors because of the nature of superannuation in this country, where superannuation funds are invested in the private marketplace, and the type of retirement you're able to enjoy depends on the vagaries of the stock market. Because over 50 cents in every dollar of superannuation funds are invested and reinvested in the stock market every day. So they did change the way people fought in this country. If we go back to the 19th century, the struggle in the 19th century, especially in the European theatre, was a struggle which was based on changing the nature of the state. The state traditionally has a monopoly on the exercise of force. That's what gives it its power, its monopoly on the exercise of force. And traditionally, as we are currently seeing in Burma, the focus and the essence of the state is to maintain the status quo. It's about maintaining the status quo, it's about maintaining the power of those who are in power, who continue to exercise power. But during the 19th century and 20th century, during the era of reform and revolution, ordinary people who are written out of the pages of this country's history book, people who are ignored, marginalised, exploited, began to hear another song. They began to sing from another song sheet. They stopped singing from the song sheet which was provided for them by those who own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication. And they forced the state to adopt a different face. And that face revolved around the state providing services and security, not just defence security, but financial and economic security to its citizens. The state took on the role of providing universal health care, of providing universal free education, of providing social security benefits. The state didn't take on that role voluntarily. It took on that role to prevent revolution in those countries. Because as people became more and more active and demanded more, and the way they fought and the way they were thinking changed, things were never the same again. But interestingly, over the last 40 years, during the deregulation, privatisation, globalisation, corporatisation revolution, things are the same again. We now find ourselves in a situation which was similar to the 18th and 19th century, where inequalities between people grew, where we have the ridiculous situation of a country as rich as Australia, with 25 million people living on a resource-rich continent, now having over 1 million children living in poverty, where we have private charities like the Smiths family raising money to ensure that children who are frozen out of supposedly a 3 education system can actually attend school and have the necessary materials to attend school. This hasn't occurred because we are a poor country. This has occurred because we've changed the way of thinking. Through Keating, through Hawke, through Howard, and through subsequent Prime Ministers, we have allowed that small percentage of the population, about 1%, that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, to dominate every aspect of our lives. Because we all thought we were all entrepreneurs, that the trickle-down effect would mean that everybody would share the profits made by the changes which occurred in our society, which removed regulations which had come into place through decades of struggle to protect people at work and in the community in general. It removed laws which prevented corporations from dominating every aspect of our existence. In Australia today, we have situations which aren't even tolerated in the United States, where they have antitrust laws which prevents a single corporation from dominating over 25% of that country's resources. And currently, with the mega giants, technology giants, there's a huge discussion about breaking them up because of the power they're able to exercise in the United States of America. But in this country, there are no antitrust laws. None whatsoever. So we can have 2 or 3 major corporations dominating the marketplace in various spheres, setting prices and creating profits how they will. Then we have the tragedy of privatisation, where we have allowed resources which were built up by the blood, sweat and tears of ordinary people to provide basic services to the population, like a broadcasting service, a postal service, a health service, electricity, gas, water, have now all been privatised and put in the hands of the private sector, removing what little power that people have to influence policy. And we have seen this consistently during the COVID-19 crisis. Well, all that governments seem to be able to do is outsource their responsibility to private corporations who are there not to service the population but to make a profit from that particular contract. And we see problem after problem after problem develop around the COVID-19 response and the vaccination response because of the privatisation of services which should be administered and run by government. Then we have the tragedy where we've given up our sovereign economic rights to overseas corporations who basically do what they like in this country. But this has all occurred because we have allowed it to happen. You, me, the few people listening to this, watching this YouTube, we have allowed it to happen. Maybe we talked about that it shouldn't happen, that resisted it, but as far as the general population is concerned, they allowed it to happen because they believed the propaganda. The way to a better life lay through giving the private sector its head, by removing competition. And I'm not talking about competition between duopolies or monopolies and corporations. I'm talking about competition which occurs when you have a strong state-based economic system competing with the private sector in conjunction with the collective and cooperative sector. In Australia today, we have removed all real competition against the private sector. The privatisation of the Commonwealth Bank, the privatisation of Telstra, the privatisation of electricity, gas, water, and the list goes on and on. All these efforts to privatise various aspects of our day-to-day lives have meant that private corporations now dominate this area. And when you have a complaint as a citizen, there's little you can do, because the organisations which are set up by governments to police these private corporations delivering public services are usually understaffed, under-resources, and as we saw with the aged care fiasco, that there's little the government can do. Little. Because they don't have the power. And more importantly, people are still singing from that same song sheet. People are still concerned about their superannuation. People are still concerned about making a profit. They're still concerned about competing against their fellow citizens, not cooperating with them. They still believe that privatisation, corporatisation, globalisation and deregulation are the way forward. And more importantly, we've now reached a situation in Australia in 2021 where people believe there is no other alternative. There is no other way. The only way forward is to increase the privatisation, increase corporatisation, increase globalisation, increase deregulation. And governments of all political hues, including the Alternative Liberal Party masquerading as the Australian Labor Party, continue to put forward policies which reinforce the power of that small section of society that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, while we see increasing poverty, not just among the 30 to 35% of people who rely on social security benefits to survive, but a poverty of lifestyle among wage earners. So, what do I mean by poverty of lifestyle? What I mean by poverty of lifestyle is people accepting the fact that they need to pay high prices for real estate, for a roof over their heads. Accepting the fact that two people in a family need to work in order to meet repayments on a mortgage. Accepting the fact that if you fall on hard times and you have to sell your home and your home doesn't realise the money the bank lent you, the bank can pursue you for all eternity for that outstanding money. By accepting the fact there is no other way, by accepting the fact that we need to work long hours. Now, Australians like to think of themselves as carefree people. The reality is it's very different. We have one of the most angst-ridden societies in the world. We have one of the highest depression rates in the world, one of the highest suicide rates in the world. We have the highest personal financial debt in the world. We have one of the highest housing prices in the world. So as far as satisfaction is concerned with life, there is a lack of satisfactions as the cities grow, the number of people in the cities grow, the services decrease, and people fight for diminishing resources. So that's the dilemma that we face in the 21st century. And it's related to the way we think. And as Steve Biko and many others have said over the centuries, over thousands of years, change the way people think, things will never be the same again. So we have reached that critical juncture in Australian life today, in 2021. If we want change, we need to be involved in movements and campaigns that change the way people think. to change their thinking. It's only the private sector which can provide services. It's only the private sector that can do things efficiently. It's only the private sector which can remove poverty. The reality is very different for most Australians. Whether you're on a social security benefit and you're working to survive, or whether you're on a wage, and let's not forget that most Australians are on some type of wage. The reality is that for over 90% of people in this country, life is difficult. Not in terms of the material goods that we surround ourselves with, the mobile phones, access to the net, the computers, entertainment. But it's difficult in terms of maintaining a lifestyle which is able to allow us to pursue a life that is free of anxiety, which is able to allow us to look after the needs of our children and allow us to look after the needs of our community, especially those in our community who have not benefited by the deregulation, privatisation, globalisation, privatisation revolution. Only about 8% of Australians have benefited, and as I said before, they are the ones with disposable income. What that means in plain English is, at the end of the day, if they can pay all their bills and they have money left over, they can use that money to invest in their bloated superannuation schemes, or they can use that money to buy property and gain tax advantages through negative gearing. They can use that money to purchase shares and gain tax advantage through franking credits. Well, everybody else who doesn't have disposable income finds themselves in a situation where they are treading water. So if this is the type of society you want to live in, well and good. Well and good. Possibly you're happy with the anxious state of the people around you. You're happy with the divisions which have occurred in our society. You're happy with the fact that this country has little future if we continue on this pathway. But if you want something different, if you want something which is based in cooperation, not competition, if you want a society where the needs of each and every one of us are met, if you want a society where you don't have 1 million children living in poverty in a population of 25 million, if you want that type of society, well, it's time to change the way you are thinking. By continuing down this path we took 40 years ago, things will get worse. They'll get better for a small percentage of the population, as we see with increasing profits and the increasing number of luxury cars on our roads and the increasing number of luxury yachts around the coast. But they won't get better for the majority of people who will be saddled with intergenerational debt, passing on a housing mortgage to their children or dependents when they die. This is the reality. And the only way we can change that reality is by changing the way we think. And if we can change the way we think, things will never be the same again. If you're interested in going down this path, I encourage you to look at the Public Interest Before Corporate Interests website, pibci.info. If you like what you see, download the application form, join Public Interest Before Corporate Interests. Currently we have approximately 450 members on the federal electoral roll. We need 550 to register as a political party. If you're unhappy with the way things are, if you want to change the way you're thinking, if you want to make a difference, if you want to work with like-minded people, now's the time to act. For far too long, too many Australians have belonged to the somebody should do something about that tribe, not thinking that they should do something about what's happening around them. And too many Australians belong to the gunner tribe. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, but in the end they do nothing. So sever your links with the gunner tribe, sever your links with the somebody should do something about that tribe, and join Public Interests Before Corporate Interests, and stop being a cringing, carping, complaining consumer and become a citizen who has rights and responsibilities.